Hello world, and welcome to this week's episode of Google Plus Developers Live. I'm Gus Class, a developer programs engineer on the Google Plus team. And earlier this year, Joanna Smith and I gave a talk at I/O on best practices for Google Plus sign-in. We're going to cover one of those concepts today, and this is reflecting the user back and welcoming them when they've signed into your site. So as a foundational thing about Google Plus sign-in, the goal when you integrate is to get that user to sign into your site and then become connected to your site in a way that they build an emotional connection. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to start with a very basic site, and then I'm going to make marginal improvements on that sign-in experience to show you ways that you can be creative and create a more engaging experience. So if you look at my screen, here's the basic site. On the top right-hand corner of the site, which is one of the hotspots for where users look when they see your site the first time, is the Google Plus sign-in button. And on the top left, I invite the user to sign in. So let's take a look at just the basic scaffolding that we're building from here, and look at that code behind the site that's relevant. So here is that index.html markup. And if you look inside of here, this is a very basic sign-in button. I'm connecting that sign-in button to the global callback, which is called out as onSignIn callback. And then from within that global callback, I'm connecting the user to a helper module, which contains the functionality for doing things like rendering the user experience. So if you just look here inside of that onSignIn callback, what I'm doing is I'm just hiding the sign-in button, rendering a disconnect button, and then kind of connecting that user with that helper.connect method. And actually, sorry, what I meant to say was inside of helper.connect is where we're going to render the various user experience for that sign-in. So let's go back to the site and let's see what happens when I sign in the first time. So here you have the site again. There's lots of cute pictures of puppies on here, and that user is invited to sign in so that they can do all the great things that they can do once they're signed into the site. So I'll click sign in, and the Google sign-in authorization dialog should render. We'll see what happens before that happens. So looks like we're having some connectivity issues here. No big deal. Go back, and there it goes. So here's that authorization dialog that you've become very familiar with because you're Google Plus developers. And so inside of this authorization dialog, you can see the various things that Google is requesting for on the top, and the various things that will become publicly available when from the user's friends. So I'll just sign in here. And once I sign in, something is going to happen on the site. And that something that happens is really what we're going to focus on today. So in this really basic example, what we're doing is we hide the sign-in button, we render a disconnect button, and then we reflect the user's display name back to them, indicating to them, oh, you're signed in now. And so this is a real basic implementation. And so we're not doing anything special yet, but this is a good start. So let's take a look at how I'm doing this. So I'll go back in here. Let's look at some code. And so here's that basic example. And you'll notice that I'm using jQuery and jQuery UI. You can do this any way that you like. A lot of people are talking about various ways of just kind of using raw JavaScript and CSS referencing. It doesn't really matter. But the point here is the things that are happening. So on the top here, you can see where I hide the various things that are going to be updated. And then you can see where I render that signed in as the current user. And then you can see where I show the disconnect button and then show the authorization buttons. And so what happens here is after that user signs in, that sign-in button disappears, and then a disconnect button appears, and that user profile appears again. So let's go back and look at that disconnect button. So what I've done is I've just kind of tried to do something cute here to sort of match the theme of my site. And I've added this little disconnect button. When you click disconnect, the user is prompted with a disconnect dialog, and then the user, after they click disconnect, they break up with the site, and then they're disconnected. So there's that basic experience. Let's think about ways that we can make it even better. So if you're following here, you'll notice also that this is actually a live site. So if you want to check this out on your own, you're welcome to and look at my code directly. But moving along, here is a better experience. So I'll just reload this page to make sure that it's all good. And so here's that same experience that the developer sees. The sign in button in that hot spot in the top right-hand corner, and then the user signs in. And after you sign in, something different is going to happen. That user's profile information, their picture, which is extracted from their Google Plus profile, is then displayed alongside their name, and then that same experience from before happens. So let's again revisit that code and see what we're doing differently. So the key point that I want you to take away from the code that I'm showing you here is that the differences between an awesome experience and a real basic experience is almost trivial. You don't have to do very much more to create a more engaging experience. So looking at the code here, the big change that happens now is that HTML, as opposed to being rendered just based on the user's display name, is being created using this getProfileHTML function. So you'll notice that the first thing that we do is we get that user's image URL, and that image URL then will be put inside of that profile box along with alt text displaying their display name, and then that user's display name again is going to be reflected back to the user. So something special happens when the user sees themselves looking back on the site. They think to themselves, I am part of this site now. My experience is tailored to me. And now like that social connection is made there, so that if other people exist on that site, or if you're building these connections with other people on the site, then you know that it's a face-to-face sort of conversation and experience. So I'm going to show you one more way that you can make it better. I'll just disconnect here again, reload the page, and I'm just using these anchor tags to kind of distinguish between the various experiences. So I'll sign in. And after that sign in, something different is going to happen. You might have missed it, but on the top left-hand corner of the site, my profile was rendered, and then it bounces. So let's take one more look at that. Awesome. So you see that profile bounce, and then all of a sudden your attention is drawn right to it. Now, I'm not going to say that this is like what you should do specifically for your site, but this is one unique way that you can kind of enhance that experience, draw the user in more, and let them know that, yeah, I'm signed into this site. I'm there, and here's my information. Here's the information that Google is presenting to me. And now I'm kind of part of this site's experience. So this is going to be the final code snippet that I'll show you. And again, this is just a very small change to that code that we had seen as our basic example. So what we're doing differently here is we're using a jQuery UI effect for bounce, and we're setting a timeout for that animation to show. So that's pretty much it. The real key takeaway here is try to be creative in the way that you're integrating Google Plus Sign-In, and think about the things that you can do that are unique to your site to distinguish it from just sort of that boring old or conventional sign-in experience where just the user signs in, they're authorized on your site, and that's it. So think about ways that you can make your experience better, and keep an eye out for future Google Plus GDLs, because we're going to be showing additional things that you can do to improve your site experience. Thanks for watching.